Hi there, kids! Continuando, vamos lá. Bom, já sabemos to speak, to understand. Agora sabemos qual é o país, where we were born. Agora vamos saber onde é que nós moramos, né? We live, nós moramos. Live quer dizer duas coisas. É tanto onde eu moro, morar, o verbo morar, quanto o verbo viver, tá? Tudo isso é live, mas aqui nós só vamos considerar o morar, né? É a mesma coisa. Onde você vive, onde você mora, né? Moro no Brasil. Então, eu livo, né? Eu live in Brazil. Então, olha só, to live. Vamos lá, repeat. To live. Again, to live. One more time, to live. Vamos conjugar então o verbo morar in the present tense. Vamos lá. I live, you live, he lives, singular S, right? She lives, it lives, we live, you live, they live. All right. Então, esses são o affirmative. I live. He lives. They live. And so on, etc. Right? Negative. I don't live. He doesn't live. All right. Interrogative. Do I live? Does he live? Do they live? And the answer is yes, I do. No, he doesn't. Yes, we do. No, they don't. And so on. Assim por diante, right? All right. Então, olha só. Bob lives in the USA, right? Repeat. Bob lives in the USA. Perfect. And moral. Mauro lives in the USA and in Brazil. Né? Faz de conta que ele tem duas moradias, right? And Peter. Peter lives in Portugal, right? And Alan. Alan lives in France. And Anthony. Anthony lives in Italy. And George. George lives in Greece. Perfect. And Mary. Mary lives in Germany. Perfect. Does Mary live in Germany? Yes, she does. Does Mary live in Austria? No, she doesn't. Where does she live? She lives in Germany. Who lives in Germany? Mary does. Perfect. Who lives in the USA? Bob and Mauro do. Plural. They, right? They do. Who lives in Italy? Anthony does. Who lives in France? Alan does. Who lives in Austria? Tony does. Where does Jose live? He lives in Spain. And Sally, where does she live? She lives in Korea. Perfect. Does Mauro live in Korea? No, he doesn't. Does Peter live in Korea? No, he doesn't. Where does he live? He lives in Portugal. Who lives in Greece? George does. Perfect. Who lives in Austria? Tony does. All right. Where does Sally live? She lives in Korea. Where does Bob live? He lives in the USA. Who lives in the USA? Bob does. Perfect. Who lives in France? Alan does. Where does Alan live? He lives in France. Perfect. Does Jose live in France? No, he doesn't. Where does he live? He lives in Spain. Who lives in Spain? Jose does. Perfect. Where does Mary live? She lives in Germany. Perfect. Who lives in Italy? Anthony does. All right. Does Peter live in Italy? No, he doesn't. Where does he live? He lives in Portugal. Perfect. Who lives in China? Chang does. Perfect. Who lives in Japan? Lily does. Does Jose live in Japan? No, he doesn't. Where does Jose live? He lives in Spain. Perfect. Where does Peter live? He lives in Portugal. Perfect. Who lives in the USA? Bob and Morrow do. All right. Where do you live? You. Where do you live? All right. Aí você responde: I live in algum lugar, right? Live, atenção, attention to the preposition. I live in, certo? Lembrando sempre a preposição que o verbo pede. I live in, né? I live in the US, I live in Brazil, I live in Japan, I live in France. I go to, né? Eu vou para, olha a preposição to, mostrando direção. I go to school, I go to the supermarket. Lembrando, né? Tava lembrando as preposições. Perfect. Então, where does Mary live? She lives in Germany. Perfect. Where does Jose live? He lives in Spain. Perfect. Does Alan live in France? Yes, he does. Where does Anthony live? He lives in Italy. Perfect. Perfect. Era isso aí. Nessa lição, a gente praticar o verbo to live, né? Morar. Alright? Muito bem. Então capricha, depois volta que tem mais pela frente. See you later, alligator!